Chapter 23 to 24. Knight Fujimaru Narita returned home and announced the great news that the contract had been signed, allowing the family to begin making preparations for their trip in earnest. Fujimaru Narita was delighted at the opportunity to spend time with his family. Fujimaru Chiyo was also pleased, looking forward to a break from her household responsibilities. Sakura, unconsciously influenced by the joy of the Fujimaru couple, was happy as well. However, Shirou, upon learning of the news, was unable to feel happy. If he had been informed the day before, Shirou might have already been dancing with joy. However, this news arrived one day too late. "What's the matter, Shirou? Weren't you begging to leave Fuyuki City every day? Why are you wearing such a sour expression?" Mrs. Fujimaru asked, puzzled. "Nothing, I'm very happy, dear mother." Shirou forced a smile and tried to conceal his inner unrest and fear. "That's better, Mrs. Fujimaru said, patting Shirou's shoulder cheerfully. She didn't notice the subtle changes in Shirou's demeanor. The entire family happily discussed their travel plans, and Shirou, not wanting to dampen their mood, forced a smile and joined in the discussion. However, he knew deep down that he would not be able to go on the trip. Fate was cruel, as he now had to participate in the war that he had been avoiding all this time. Or else that completely self-centered Tsunobu might take the lives of his entire family. The night was completely dark. It was time to go to sleep. Today, Sakura finally summoned the courage to take the first step in her new life and slept in her own room for the first time. It was a shame that the soft, fluffy pillow was no longer there, but it was for the better. He knew that he would sweat profusely while fighting the old purple-haired woman in his dreams and didn't want to risk drenching Sakura's clothes. So he accepted this arrangement. In 1993, the world had few entertainment options, so Shirou quickly fell asleep. As soon as he was asleep, Skathik arrived as expected. She held 2 spears and without saying a word, prepared to commit domestic violence against Shirou. "Wait a minute, wait a minute. My dear Shishu, wait a minute." Shirou called out quickly, "What's wrong?" Skathik stopped and looked at Shirou with curiosity. "Well, can you still contact Mr. Gold?" Shirou asked cautiously. "Mr. Gold?" Skathik paused, then reacted and smiled gently. "You mean that foul-mouthed guy?" Shirou nodded hurriedly. "Yes, I can. What's wrong?" Skathik asked. "I won't run away or hide anymore. I just want to send my family out of Fuyuki City first. Can you help me ask if that's okay?" "Why don't you ask him yourself? He's in the same city as you," Skathik asked. "Fuyuki City is too big. I won't be able to find him," Shirou replied. "And he doesn't want to meet that guy," Shirou thought to himself. "Poor child. All right. I'll help you ask him," Skathik said gently. Shirou's eyes lit up, and he said, with a face full of grievance, "My beautiful sister, Skathik Nessen, you know the pitifulness of a child as well. Why don't you become my servant and save the poor child?" In response, Shirou was met with a spear that directly pierced his head, as well as a gentle voice. "I also want to, but I can't. The world now doesn't have the foundation for me to materialize. Besides, your teacher taught you to never let your guard down, especially towards beautiful women," Skathik added. After being killed 56 times by Skathik, Shirou collapsed in the dream world, his face tired and overwhelmed. Then, "Have I made progress?" Shirou asked, exhausted. "How to say it? Not at all." Skathik shook her head, and for the first time, her delicate, fairy-like face showed a somewhat troubled expression. "I've never seen a disciple as hard to teach as you before. Given that I've been holding back significantly, even my worst disciples would be able to fight back when it reached around 10th rounds. It may sound harsh, but you are the first person I've encountered who, despite almost 100 attempts, is still unable to withstand a single hit from me. Is it possible for you to hold back even more? My reaction time can't match up to your speed at all. Unfortunately, I can't hold back any further. I've already reduced my strength to a minimum. If I hold back any more, it would be like standing still and allowing you to defeat me. Skathok shook her head and smiled gently. This is a difficult reality to accept. Shirou laughed bitterly, but don't be too discouraged. As someone who has lived for a long time, I've seen many late bloomers who improve dramatically over time. It's not that your eyes and reaction speed can't keep up, but rather that you simply haven't adapted yet. So, keep working hard, my weakest disciple. Skathok laughed. But the war that will claim my life is coming soon. Shirou sat up and had a sudden, crooked thought, quickly asking, "By the way, how old?" Before he could finish his crooked thought, Skathok threw the spear in her hand, likely using all her strength. The spear passed through Shirou's bangs and exploded with a thunderous roar behind him in an indescribable way. Boom! The explosion's fire illuminated Shirou's stunned face. Skathok pointed the spear at Shirou, her tone apologetic. "Oh, sorry, my hand slipped." She did it on purpose. She definitely did it on purpose. Shirou was so shocked by the attack that he felt like he might wet himself. He felt like he would have died from it in a dream too. Furthermore, even with such a gentle tone, she can't hide the fact that she's holding a spear and the look on her face as if she wants to kill him. Scary, so scary. It's so scary when Skathok, who's like a big sister, gets angry. Skathok Neeson, who is young, beautiful, and cute as a flower, must be very tired from teaching this disciple. Let me rub your shoulders and massage your legs to help you relax. Swallowing nervously, Shirou quickly stood up and put on a flattering smile, approaching Skathok from behind and starting to rub her shoulders. Despite being such a violent female Tyrannosaurus, her body is surprisingly soft and tender. As he gently tapped Skathok's back from behind, Shirou couldn't help but glance at the woman's ample chest before quickly looking away. He knew that only the strong were allowed to possess beauty, and he saw himself as nothing more than a sparrow struggling to survive. Survival was all that mattered to him. Besides, once he scrapes through the Fourth Holy Grail War and rides the internet's popularity to become a wealthy man, he can go and support some pretty girl of this era or something. "Shirou, what does Neisan mean?" Skathok asked with a smile. "Is that how young women are addressed in your time? It sounds a bit strange, but I kind of like it." Theft. After being coaxed into a good mood, Skathok ended the dream, causing Shirou to wake up and find that he was wet again. In the dream, Shirou was killed 56 times by Skathok, and the tension and excitement of life and death caused his adrenaline to surge, leading to his entire bed being soaked with sweat. Fortunately, Shirou did not sleep with Sakura the previous night. Otherwise, he would likely have been misunderstood as wetting the bed, which would have been very embarrassing. On this day, Mr. Fujimaru, who had completed the contract, had to go to the company first to hand over his work to his colleagues before he could take a complete vacation. Mrs. Fujimaru, on the other hand, wanted to consult with Shirou and Sakura about where to go and decided to purchase food for the trip. After all, buying things at tourist attractions can be several times more expensive, and it is a housewife's duty to make the trip as economical as possible. However, Shirou couldn't get excited about it. Facing the rapidly approaching Fourth Holy Grail War, Shirou must make an effort to preserve his own life. Yes, he had learned from Skathok that the Fourth Holy Grail War had already started, and only the final 2 servants were on their way. so they will be here in 2 or 3 days. Shirou did not know, but this was indeed the last day he could prepare for the Holy Grail War. The 3 families had prepared for the war for 60 years, and the other participants also prepared for at least half a year, but he, the unlucky one, had less than 3 days of preparation time. No, had he planned on participating from the start, he would have had at least a month to prepare. But as he had always wanted to avoid it, he was left with only 3 days to get ready. Isn't this also a form of unforeseen punishment? The clown, who had hoped to break free from the script written by the goddess of fate, is ultimately punished by the goddess. While Sakura and Mrs. Fujimaru went to the department store to buy snacks for the trip, Shirou stayed home, drawing up his own battle plans on paper with a pen. In his previous life as one of the world's 450 million urban youth, Shirou, like many of his peers, was known for his focus on career planning. Therefore, whenever he set out to do something, he always liked to make a list of his plans first. Despite this, Shirou didn't rush through the process of writing his plan. Instead, he first took the time to recall the general events of the Fourth Holy Grail War, and then systematically listed and analyzed them one by one. The only uncertainty he faced was not knowing when the timeline had been disrupted, leading to a chain of butterfly effects. Initially, it was Sakura who had run away from home, and then he replaced the role of caster in place of Gilade race. Since Sakura was not passed down to the Matu family, Matu career was not altered, which in turn prevented him from participating in the war as a combatant. Additionally, Berserker was not Lancelot, but rather Spartacus. Did the other servants change as well? Shirou didn't know this, and could only consider the worst-case scenario. If both the characters and plot have changed, then I really don't stand a chance of winning at all. Shirou sighed, feeling a headache coming on. The only person he could be sure of was Archer Gilgamesh, whom he had seen in person. He had no way of knowing if anyone else had changed. He also had no understanding of how the butterfly effect had come into play. If the servants and even the masters had undergone complete transformations, he knew he would be in deep trouble. Shirou knew he was not as strong as others, and he couldn't outmaneuver them with strategic thinking. His only advantage lay in his familiarity with the plot and character setting. If even that was taken away from him, then his best option would be to enjoy himself by eating and drinking well, and then wash his neck clean and wait to be slaughtered. Shirou sighed with worry. At night, with Mrs. Fujimaru's advice, they decided to go on a trip to Hokkaido for fun. Everyone was very happy, and Shirou didn't want to ruin the mood, so he forced himself to put on a happy smile. As Mr. Fujimaru had said, boys are different from men. Men have things that they must protect. Shirou knew he was a man now too. Shirou entered the land of shadow in his dreams again at night. While Scatha killed him 57 times, she also brought him a message. The jerk with the Chunabu syndrome had agreed to Shirou's request and allowed him to send his family away before coming back to fight. Upon hearing this, Shirou finally let out a sigh of relief and praised the guy for showing some humanity. But when he came back to his senses, Shirou sadly realized that even though he had been oppressed by the guy with Chunabu syndrome, he still had to praise the other guy's humanity. Is it really true that reducing some of the oppression would make the oppressed person happy? It seems that Spartacus's classification of him as an oppressed person is not without reason. However, Shirou also breathed a sigh of relief. Misfortune does not extend to one's family. It's not necessarily true in the context of a Magus battle, especially for a self-proclaimed hero of justice who will do anything to achieve their idea of justice. Before dawn, when he was thrown out by Scathach, Shirou hugged Scathach's legs and begged with great emotion, "Shirou, my dear Shirou, please materialize and become my servant." This was the third time that Shirou begged for help from Skathak, and it could be considered akin to making 3 visits to a temple in the hopes of receiving a blessing. One might wonder if Skathak will finally agree to Shirou's request this time. Can't materialize? What a joke. If she can't materialize, how did she appear in FGO? Did she crawl out with her head? Despite Shirou's persistent pleading, Skathak remained firm and shook her head, smiling. She said, "There is no way. I would love to fight alongside the heroes of that era, but it is simply not possible." If an ordinary servant were bugged by Shirou's repeated pleading, they might feel a little annoyed, even if they didn't hate him. However, Skathak's tone remained gentle and patient, despite this being the third time Shirou had begged her for help. But in that gentle tone, there was still a sense of refusal. "Besides, I haven't abandoned you. Am I not helping you train now?" Skathak smiled, trying to reassure Shirou. "Is this really helpful?" Shirou asked, raising his head to look at her. "Of course it is," Skathak replied, nodding. "It has reduced the level of ugliness in your death from extremely ugly to just very ugly. That's definitely progress." Shirou's face was covered in tears as he realized that Skathak Neeson has changed. She is no longer the understanding and gentle Neeson, but has become sarcastic. Despite the sarcastic tone, what Skathak said was true. Shirou was just an ordinary person from the 21st century who had never fought or killed anyone. He was a member of the largest group of ordinary people, with no experience in combat. What is the point of a few days of training when there are mythical murderers who have been stabbing people with knives since they were children? Furthermore, how many of those mythical murderers are not the embodiment of their legend? How many so-called heroes, especially Western heroes, are not given strength and magical artifacts by gods, dragons, elves, and other unimaginable fantasy creatures? How much time did these heroes spend training and fighting on the battlefield? Given this, what chance does an ordinary modern person, who has only trained for a few days and whose body has not even reached puberty yet, stand against murderers who have been killing people since they were young and who possess various superpowers? Additionally, what is the definition of an ordinary person? Is it the reader who cries while reading someone else's story, or the salaried worker who feels trapped by life? Is it realistic to think that a group of people like this, who have only trained for a few days, could stand a chance against murderers who have been killing people since they were young and who possess various superpowers? It's a dead end. Shirou bitterly laughed to himself. "Don't be so pessimistic," Skathak said with a smile, pointing to Shirou's forehead with her slender fingers. "Haven't you noticed that you have an advantage that is stronger and more advantageous than anyone else, even that smelly guy, or even me?" Shirou looked bewildered. "I do. Do I have something like that?" "Yes, I originally wanted you to discover it on your own," Skathak replied, her lips curling slightly to reveal a smile like a ray of winter sunshine. "But you, my weakest disciple, are too stupid. If I don't remind you, I'm afraid you'll go and die with this kind of self-abasing thought." "Shirou, what is it?" Shirou asked, urgently, staring at Skathak's pretty face. "Remember this," Skathak said with a smile. "No matter how detailed modern knowledge the Holy Grail gives to servants, it cannot change the fact that they are ancient people, and their knowledge and cognition cannot be harmoniously unified. However, the Holy Grail War happens in your city, in your time, and the masters are often conservative magicians. In my time," Shirou repeated those words, his eyes suddenly lighting up as he realized his greatest advantage. "Thank you, Shirou," he said sincerely. "You're welcome," Skathik replied with a smile. As a teacher, it is only natural to give some advice to a troubled disciple, but I still want you to materialize as my servant. Shirou pouted and said, Unfortunately, that is not possible, Skathik replied, her smile still gentle. All right, the door to the dream world has been opened. You can go out on your own now. Shirou nodded and turned towards the open door to the dream world. Oh right. Skathik's voice came from behind him. Has the young lady changed her mind? Shirou quickly turned around to look at Skathik and saw that she had a gentle smile on her face. She said, The way you act spoiled towards me. Although embarrassing, I don't hate it. Spoiled, I'm not spoiled. Shirou said in a fit of embarrassment as he walked out of the dream world. Behind him, he could hear Skathik's gentle